like to be able to show you much more in the way of films or whatever on firewalkers and all of the practices that we find abroad. I know that in many countries there are all different varieties of worship of evil spirits, and hopefully I will be able to share a little bit more with you, but there are a lot of things that go on in other countries that we in Canada and United States are not completely aware of. We have opened up the door in many ways to the practice of worshiping of evil spirits, and some of them seem to be very subtle. But I know in some places we are finding that the doors are wide open to Satan worship. And they call themselves Satanists. And they have places wide open for nothing but the practice and the worship of Satan. This is sad. We've gone a long way away from the true and living God when we have such a thing taken place. But right for now, I want to go into the subject of one of these other things that we were discussing here in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 9 to 11. The soul that turneth after such as that have familiar spirits. These are what we call mediums today in our terminology. There are many people today who want to, let's say, talk to their dead loved ones. Someone has died, and they're so lonely for them. Their mother, their husband, whatever. I'm so lonely for them. If I could just hear their voice again, I'd be happy if I could just hear their voice. So what do? They go to a medium. Someone, let's say, who claims to consult with the dead. And now they go through the process of hearing or thinking that they hear their loved one's voice. Now this is the thing I want to go into right now. Are they really consulting with the dead? Is there such a thing? 1 Samuel 28, it came to pass in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. And Achish said unto David, Know thou assuredly that thou shalt go with me to battle, thou and thy men. And David said to Achish, Surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do. And Achish said to David, Therefore will I make thy keeper of mine head forever. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him, and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and wizards out of the land. Now before we go any further here, let's try and find out what a familiar spirit is and the definition of it. I have been coming from time to time to teach you on the gifts of the Spirit. Probably the first time you ever saw me on television, or the first time you were ever in one of my live seminars, you were not acquainted with me at all, were you? Didn't even know me. I was a complete stranger to you. And you might have been a little uptight, or you might have been trying to observe me to find out what kind of a person I was. You looked me up and down and either gave me an approval or disapproval. You either kept your television turned on or you flipped it off and said, Forget it, I don't want to watch that one. Who needs that? So whatever your choice was. But I was a stranger to you when you first saw me. But after coming into your homes and after you've been taking the seminars, you became acquainted with me. You became familiar with me, right? That's what familiar is. You become acquainted. You become to know somebody. You are used to having me now, coming to see you day after day, and you're not uptight anymore. All right, let's go further. This is what we call a familiar spirit. So how do we relate to this? Well, a person has literally said, yes, I want to become a medium. I want to give myself over to a spirit because I want to be able to consult with the dead. Or supposedly. Now, in many cases, the person actually willfully says, look, I want this spirit to take over in my life. But in some cases, this comes down in way of families where it passes on from one generation to the next. But basically speaking, this is what happens. The person will give themselves over to a familiar spirit, a spirit that they are acquainted with. In other words, it becomes their buddy-buddy. That spirit comes and dwells in that body, and when the person now goes into the process of trying to consult with the dead, quote, that particular spirit manifests itself so that the person who is the medium recognizes that it is that spirit or the familiar spirit. Are you following me? Are you understanding? So now the person who has given themselves over to the spirit is now there. The first time the spirit comes, literally the person becomes acquainted with it. Now it becomes familiar, and each time they consult or think they're consulting with the dead, that spirit manifests itself, so they become fully acquainted with it. Now they recognize that spirit when it's there, just like you recognize me when you turn on your television set, or you when you're here in the regular live seminars. All right, let's look at the story. Saul was told by God to put away these people, get them out of the land. Why? Because people were coming to them and bowing down to these spirits. They would come to these mediums and say, look, I want to talk to my dead loved ones. They literally believed that they could so do. Did they really? Did they really talk to the dead loved ones? Let's take a peek. And the Philistines gathered themselves together and came and pitched in Shunem, and Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. And when Saul inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by prophets. Maybe just before we go any further, let's look at what this Urim is. There is the thing called Urim and Thummim in the scriptures. And literally what it was like a breastplate that was worn. And when anyone wanted the judgment of the Lord, they would come to these priests who wore these types of breastplates. And they would ask or inquire of the Lord whether or not something was factual or something could be accomplished, or whether the Lord was with them. And they literally were called lights or perfections, which were on the breastplates. And they would literally, apparently, light up under whatever circumstances the questions or the desires of their hearts were answered. So this is what was called Urim and Thummim. And apparently Saul now had come to inquire of the Lord to find out whether or not what he should do. And Saul, being the man that he was, had disobeyed the Lord. He was told by God to get rid of all of the Amalekites. He was told to completely get rid of them, and some of the things that he did had greatly displeased God. He had not obeyed God in certain things. Therefore, the Lord had really turned his back away from God. In other words, the anointing had left him. I don't believe for 1 minute that Saul had ever lost his eternal destiny. But certainly the anointing of God had left him. And so the Lord answered him not. He didn't speak to him either by dreams, by visions, by Urim, or by prophets. Then said Saul unto the servant, seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit. How far down had Saul gone? He recognized that literally a person would have a spirit, an evil spirit. So he's not going to now inquire unto God, he's going to go to a spirit. And he recognizes it's a spirit and an evil spirit. And the name of it is a familiar spirit. That I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said unto him, well, there's a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. I often wonder, with some of our television programs, we have the story of, Samantha, bewitched, and her mother is called Endora. Yeah, maybe they got that there Do you suppose? Well, anyway, Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment, and he went, and 2 men with him. I've got to look at something here, first of all. This one really tickles my bones. First of all, Saul has come a long way from the worship of God because he had disobeyed God. Do you remember way back in the study of probably the gift of prophecy, we looked at this portion here in 1 Samuel chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 9 and verse 2, where Kish had a son called Saul, a choice young man and a goodly, and there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. Picture, will you please, Saul. And I told you I was going to come back to this portion of Scripture when we were talking about the gift of prophecy. And I said it was going to be a very important thing. Here is Saul. Picture him, please, head and shoulders above anybody else. I used to work in a jewelry store for a man who was 6'7". If he walked down the street with 2 men who were 6 feet, 1 on either side of him, he looked much taller than them. Really, he did. Or the 2 men beside him looked shorter, whichever. If the man walked down the street by himself and there was no one else with him, he didn't look quite as tall because there was no one else sort of to compare him with. And why am I talking about this? Well, it's very important, really. Of course it is in this story. Go back to 1 Samuel 28. And here is Saul. He now is going to disguise himself. He's going to put on a Halloween costume. And he's going to go to the witch of Endor. And he dresses himself up. Remember now, he's head and shoulders taller than anybody else. Picture him, please, going with 2 other men. It says so, 2 other men. And if he indeed is head and shoulders taller than any of these men, don't you think for 1 minute he would stand out like a sore thumb anyway? Don't you think that people would still recognize who he was? But he never gave that a thought. Not a thought. He came to the woman by night, and he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up whom I shall name unto thee. And the woman said unto him, Hey, hello there. You know what Saul has done, how he has cut off those that have familiar spirits and wizards out of the land. Wherefore do you lay a snare for my life to cause me to die? Now look at this woman. Do you know that sometimes when people give themselves over to evil spirits, their brains actually get softened? I'm kidding you not. This woman didn't even recognize Saul, head and shoulders above anybody else. And she's actually talking to Saul, and she doesn't even twig. Doesn't even ring any bells at all. She says, you know what Saul has done? Just talking to Saul. And he's head and shoulders above these other 2 men that came. She obviously knew he was this way because she spoke of Saul. How come you're laying a snare for my life? And Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen unto thee for this thing. Here this woman doesn't recognize it again. Only a king could swear by the Lord. And what right did this man, disguised as he was, come in and say, I swear by the Lord that nothing will happen to you? She still didn't twig. Stupid. Well, then said the woman, all right, who do you want to talk to? So he said, bring me up Samuel. Now let's just stop there for just the momento. Bring me up Samuel. Let's just go through this little bit of how they go into their mediums to talk to the dead. This is what they do. Somebody comes into their place and they say, okay, who do you want to talk to? Well, I want to talk to my dead mother. Oh, I miss her so much. I just want to hear her voice again. Now, there are a number of different procedures that they do. But first of all, basically what they do is they give themselves over and they call or open themselves up for that particular familiar spirit now to make its presence known. Some spirits manifest themselves on certain given occasions. Some manifest themselves at all times. But these types sort of come and go at the individual's will. And they go into a number of different things to call their spirits. And I won't go into all of that area, but maybe in some cases it might be important. I don't know. But nonetheless, after they have given themselves over, now that familiar spirit makes itself manifest. It's now there. And the medium knows the spirit is there. So you want to talk to your dead mother, do you, dear? Talking to the person who wants to talk to their dead mother. Now, that evil spirit literally takes control of the vocal cords of that medium. The person has given themselves over to the spirit. It is now the spirit, the familiar spirit, that is manifesting itself. And that spirit literally takes on the voice then and makes it sound like the voice of the dead mother of the person who is now wanting to talk to her dead mother. Hello, dear. Do you remember the little gift I gave you that's sitting up on the mantelpiece? That's my mother. That's my mother's voice. I'm all right, dear. And the person is just overwhelmed at hearing her mother's voice. And the person has been deceived right from the word go, because they are not consulting with the dead. They are impersonating people. They know you. They know all about you. And they can tell you a lot about you. They literally impersonate those that are dead. And it's not literally the person that they are talking to, but they think it is. Literally what is happening is that person who has come to consult with the dead is all they're doing is conversing with a dirty, evil, familiar spirit. And they believe that they're talking to their mother. It's their faith in the cursed thing that God despises. So, let me just throw this in while we're doing it. I had a woman who was literally delivered from this sort of thing. She said she did this one time. She wanted to talk to her dead husband. The spirit took on the voice of my dead husband, she said. And it even declared something that had gone on in the house and even gave her pet name. She was so sure it was her husband. Well, the first time she went, she was absolutely elated. And then she just had to speak to him again. She had to hear his voice again. So she's drawn back to it again. It's alluring. It's a seducing. And each time you go back, let me tell you something. Cross my palm. Cross my palm. You pay for it through the nose. The next time she went back, and she kept getting more depressed. Each time she went back, she kept getting more depressed, more taken over, more nervous, more distraught. And that woman had paid out thousands of dollars to keep going back and back and back to talk to her dead husband. And when she found out that all she was doing was talking to a familiar spirit, she just about flipped her lid. Now, she says, my eyes are opened, but my pocketbook is sure empty. They think they're bowing down. Or pardon me, they are bowing down to evil spirits and don't realize that they're not really consulting with the dead. So what is taking place here in this story that we're reading in 1 Samuel 28? You see, Saul comes, and he comes to consult with this woman, and he says, bring me up Samuel. Now the woman, because she is familiar with her familiar spirit, goes through her little bit. And I'm going to have to ask you to come back next time to find out exactly what she did.